Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
In a world where podcasts are a dime a dozen, one show dares to stand out from the rest.
The Film Board, a podcast unafraid to tell it like it is.
We're here for one reason and one reason only. Downloads.
That's right. We review new release movies because that's what gets people's attention.
But just because we're in it for the clicks doesn't mean we don't take our job seriously.
We're part of the Next Reel family of film podcasts, and we're proud of it.
Our reviews are just as insightful and thought-provoking as any of our other film podcasts.
It's just that this podcast is all about that sweet, sweet SEO.
The nectar squoze from the tree of Bing.
We're only human, but we're also creators.
And creators eat clicks to survive.
So if you want honest, unfiltered opinions on the very latest movies right on opening weekend,
delivered with the self-awareness of a team looking for downloads,
then tune in to The Film Board,
where every download counts, but yours counts the most.
Do you like movies?
Do you like sports?
I never played that sport on the screen, but I really enjoyed how the movie made me feel.
Well then, have we got a show for you. The Adrian Moment is where my friend Ocean and I discuss the triangulation of sports, movies, and life.
We dive deep into the movies, discussing how they relate to and have affected our lives.
We will talk about why the sport matters to the movie, why you don't have to love the sport to enjoy the movie, and mine a few nuggets of meaning inside the story you may not have realized was really there.
After listening to our show, come join us for more conversations about the movies that portray the thrill of victory
and the agony of defeat.
Find the Adrian Moment podcast on your favorite podcast app and join us while we cover the sports you love and the ones you never think about.
You will never see sports or sport movies the same again.
I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to The Next Reel. When the movie ends,
Our conversation begins.
Manhunter is over. And if one does what God does enough times, one will become as God is.
Intruder entered through kitchen sliding door.
Nationwide victims.
Yeah, this is Will Graham of the FBI.
One killer.
This is what the subject's teeth look like.
Have you ever seen blood on the moonlight well? Multiple trails.
Just you and me now, sport.
One hunter.
I'm gonna find you, damn it.
FBI agent Will Graham. Manhunter.
We're starting our series on Lecter.
Hannibal Lecter. This was your series pick. You wanted to jump into the Hannibal Lecter films. What was it that drew you to picking this particular series?
I've always loved the character. I've always loved the character of Hannibal Lecter. I saw Silence of the Lambs before I read any of the books. Then I read the books and I've obviously seen all the movies. I just genuinely like them all. This is the one I've seen the least, and today's Manhunter, and obviously it runs a bit parallel to the rest of the series, you know, once we change casting of Hannibal Lecter, but it does some interesting things. And so I was curious to revisit it as part of this series. What's your relationship to Lecter?
I mean, I was introduced to Hannibal Lecter through The Silence of the Lambs. I had never read any of the books. And I mean, it came out at a time where I probably wouldn't have been reading the books when Red Dragon was published. So I missed that. I missed this film, and I saw Silence of the Lambs. And then I've kind of continued along from there. I've only actually read The Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal, and those were both between when Silence of the Lambs came out and when Hannibal came out. So I've never read this. I've never read Hannibal Rising. So I'm a little behind on the reading, and it probably warrants me going back and just kind of doing a read of all the books just to kind of get a sense of things. But yeah, and then this one, I don't think I actually even watched it until I ended up buying it on DVD because they released a version that had the theatrical cut and the director's cut. And so that was, I think, the first time I watched it. So pretty late in the game. But it's, Michael Mann, and it's a film that I think it definitely is of its time, but there's so many things that I enjoy about it. It's just a film that I've returned to quite a number of times.
So that's what we're talking about today. But first, I have a sidebar.
Already? Okay.
Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. That's the sidebar music. Andy, last week we started a new, and I'm sure what is going to be a long-running segment on this show called I Dare You to Watch It This Week. Which is a asterisk there. I don't know if that's going to be the title. In a fit of pique, I assaulted you, finally assigning you to watch Vanya on 42nd Street. And in retaliation, you gave me a 3-hour Japanese film called Drive My Car. And I would like to know, Andy, did you watch Vanya on 42nd Street?
I'm a failure.
Our first week.
It's been a busy week. It was the worst week to suddenly start a new thing. I think for the first week, we need to have a grace period.
Okay, maybe. So Vanya is still on your list of I dare you to watch it this week.
Yeah.
I did mine, Drive My Car. I cannot believe I missed this when it came out. It was an extraordinary film. I loved it. Every bit of it was fantastic. And I love that you pivoted and gave me that movie as a Vanya movie. It's another Uncle Vanya movie. And I loved how they were portraying it in all the actors' natural languages. Also, the hero of the film is really the red Saab 900 Turbo. And I have a very soft spot in my heart because my first car was a silver Saab 900 Turbo. We actually called it Dr. Turbo. And it was the star of my movie, Dr. Turbo Shots, and his sidekick Throttle, which I made in high school. So thank you for that, Andy. It was a great recommendation. I look forward to whatever you dare me to watch this week.
We'll have to wait and see. It'll all depend on our conversation.
And now, back to the show.
All right.
Okay, so Manhunter. This is an interesting film, and I think the thing that is most interesting is that it is remembered as part of the Hannibal Lecter series, and Brian Cox plays Hannibal Lecter, who is great. But that's not what the movie's about, right? It's the central character is not Hannibal Lecter. The central character, you'd say, is Will Graham, and he's trying to solve this series of murders by Francis Dollarhyde, who is outstanding, played by Tom Noonan, and he is killing families and watching them from their yards. And so I look at this movie and I think, how did this contribute to the Hannibal Lecter lore and fandom?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, and it's interesting because even when you get to The Silence of the Lambs, I mean, Hannibal has a more prominent role, but it still is not like the focal point of the film. It's a film that's very similar to this in the sense that we're following an agent pursuing a serial killer and going to Lecter for some advice and help to do so. That's really the crux of it. And it's not really until we get to Hannibal, the third film and the third book by Thomas Harris, where we're shifting into a story that really ends up putting Hannibal more at the forefront as the kind of driving force of the film. Even though in that film there also is Starling and another madman. So it's an interesting series. It's interesting the way that it's developed, and it's interesting that Harris so strongly latched onto Lecter as kind of the focal point of or the thread that would weave through all of these different stories, even to the point where he ends up getting his own TV show. And I suppose it's probably because largely, I think, with The Silence of the Lambs, that version of the character became so iconic in the way that Anthony Hopkins portrayed him, in the just kind of the mask, the kind of the thing that they have him strapped into. Like, there were a lot of things that made that character so prominent that allowed, or maybe that spurred Harris on to kind of continue writing that character. And we'll talk about that more as we kind of get to the films later in the series. At this point, it's just such an interesting glimpse into where we're going to go, because Lecter is such a small part. I mean, they shot the bits with Brian Cox in over a 3-day period, so he hardly was actually involved in the production of the film. But he is the one, he plays the character that essentially pushed Will Graham to a breaking point when he caught him and got him locked up. And now Graham needs to kind of like get that juice again, get that connection to a serial killer so that he can start thinking that way again after kind of his retirement after catching Lecter, because his brain was kind of broken, almost driven mad. And now he's at a point where he needs that again so that he can actually get into Dollarhyde's mind. And so it's an interesting role for a serial killer in the story. And in a lot of ways, I suppose there's this connection and this, two sides of the coin type of story between cop and killer, where they both think in kind of such a similar way. It's just one is going after the kill and one is trying to capture the person going after the kill. Seeing how Lecter plays into that, I think, is such an interesting decision for Harris to write it that way.
Totally. There's no way to armchair Lecter out of the movie today, because so much has been made of the Hannibal Lecter cinematic and literary universe. But if we go back to 1986, right? You and I are doing a podcast that did not exist, but in 1986, we are talking about Manhunter. We've seen it for the first time in theaters. Can you imagine what 1986 Andy would have said about the structure of this film, knowing nothing about anything that comes after?
I'm trying to think of other serial killer types of stories that were comparable in the mid-'80s, that had come out around that time. And I can't help but feel like, there might be some that are definitely kind of police procedural stories, but I feel like a lot of them are probably in the Clint Eastwood vein, where it's much more of a tough cop and it's more of an action thriller. I'm thinking of like sudden impact types of stories. And I'm wondering if there were other cop detective stories that really kind of looked at the procedure. There must be some, but I think what's interesting about this film, and coming from at that point, if you're paying attention to the world of film and TV, you're walking into this going, this is directed by the guy who did Miami Vice, right? And so
it's
Thief,
like particular, right? That's what.
Right. But just like, I think Miami Vice was the thing that largely is between Thief and this, right? And so all of those TV shows or TV episodes, and certainly like the color schemes and everything is so Miami Vice looking. And so walking into this feeling like it's an interesting take on a serial killer film, I think, because I think if you're looking for something that's more like a Clint Eastwood type of one, this feels so different.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that it's one of the big criticisms of the film is that, it's Michael Mann style over substance, which is, I don't think is a criticism that can be faulted. But if I'm looking at it specifically from the architecture of character economy, I think there's a universe in which 1986 Pete, having just seen this movie, would say, this Lecter character is nonsense. Why do we have him? We have a deeply experienced detective in Will Graham, played fantastically by William Petersen, and we have a horrifying serial killer in Tom Noonan, who is incredibly compelling. Why do we need Hannibal Lecter between these two? And I think the argument that Will Graham has to get his juice back is the thinnest of the narrative approaches to this in this movie. It is the thing that it just holds on by a thread, largely buoyed by the fact that that the movies were, remade in the form of Anthony Hopkins and Clarice Starling, which we'll talk about next week. There is a thing that sets that movie's use of Hannibal Lecter apart that this movie does not have, because Will Graham is such an experienced and compelling detective. Why does he need Hannibal Lecter? The movie does, and I, it's been so long since I've read the book, but my hunch is the book probably makes a better case for why that relationship exists. The movie does not, in my opinion. And I think, if you look at just character economy, it's a distraction. That's my hunch.
Well, that was going to be my question for you. How much of the book did you remember? Because again, I haven't read this book, so I wasn't exactly sure how much we're seeing of, if it's the same reasons that he goes to see Lecter and everything in the book, or what?
I think the bigger issue is around Dollarhyde. What I remember about Dollarhyde is that the book has all of Dollarhyde's backstory. It's Dollarhyde's story. He's a super tragic figure in the book. And in the movie, he's kind of an abstract, distant phantom that I don't think we end up caring as much about up to the final, confrontation through the window. And I think that does disrespect to the character and Noonan's performance. That's it. I'm what you get in, 400 pages is a beefed up Dollarhyde, a beefed up Lecter, I'm sure. And I don't actually remember how Will Graham is treated, if he's more or less expanded upon.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the plot synopsis on Wikipedia quickly. He had retired after suffering serious injuries from the encounter with Lecter, who he did actually capture and get locked up. And it sounds like in the book, it's not like he's already gone to the crime scenes. He's already kind of figured out the stakeout location, climbed the tree, found the Chinese character carved into the tree, figured out it's the symbol of the red dragon, but is at a dead end and realizes that he has to visit Lecter to help him and give him perhaps some clues to the killer's pathology. And so I feel like that's an interesting element, because it sounds like in the book, Lecter factors into it later. I'm kind of with you. I struggle a little bit with the Lecter elements, because, and not even the Lecter elements, it's more just the fact that Will's reasoning to go visit him. But I think it was really because in this particular version of the story, they latched onto this idea of Will needing to kind of get back into that mindset. And again, Lecter even says it's like, the reason that you caught me is because we're so alike, and to the point where that freaks Will out, and he has to get out of the room. And I think that's the interesting element. It's an interesting element in that psyche that we have with Will, but perhaps it's something that they dwell on too much, in the sense that because he had retired, he for some reason needs to talk to a serial killer just to start getting into the groove again, and that might be why we struggle with it a little bit,
Well, he also needed a therapist, and they're really hard to get through insurance, and Lecter's a therapist, and maybe that was the easiest get.
Right.
That's a horrible joke.
Could be.
Okay, so I feel like we're largely on the same page, which again, I think Brian Cox is an interesting portrayal of Dr. Lecter, especially when you fashion what we learn about Dr. Lecter in subsequent material. I think Brian Cox is an able Lecter. The approach was changed. Something triggered Hannibal Lecter when Anthony Hopkins played it, but I think he's great.
But some people say he's better than Anthony Hopkins. I mean, can you see that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Just as restrained and super pragmatic as he is. And I think it's chilling in his own right. I prefer Anthony Hopkins, and I think Anthony Hopkins, there is a universe in which I would be very curious to see a Brian Cox-led film about Hannibal Lecter, because I think he would be great if he's given the opportunity to shine as the central character. Again, obviously, no disrespect to his performance. It's right up there. It's great. It's just, I don't see its purpose in the film as easily.
It is interesting. And I guess I buy into it because of the reason that they put it here. but it is one of the elements that I struggle with. Now, it's interesting. On the flip side of things, there is a part of me that actually finds the time with Lecter a little more enjoyable than the time with Dollarhyde. And I think part of that is because I don't think I like Tom Noonan as much as you do. And I think that's in general. I think I've largely always struggled with Tom Noonan as a performer. And so I think there are interesting things here that work to make him off-putting, like adding the little hair lip and things like that. Kind of just like the unkempt, baldish head that he has. Like there are things that they do to kind of just keep him unappealing. But I don't know. There's something about him as an actor that I've just never quite clicked with, and I always struggle a little bit.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I think he's a deeply curious character actor. And I think all of the things that you described that make him off-putting are making him off-putting as Dollarhyde, which is the point. I need to be put off, by Francis Dollarhyde.
Sure.
He's an off-putting human being. So I find that curious. Can you talk more about that? What is it about the performance that you don't connect with? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't necessarily think it's the performance. I just think it's him. Like I just struggle with him as an actor that when I see him on screen, I'm just not as invested in it for some reason. I'm trying to think of any Tom Noonan performance where I've really kind of enjoyed the film. I don't know. There might be one. I'm not thinking of anything off the top of my head, but
you're not a big Synecdoche, New York fan?
No, really did not like that movie.
That seems like a thing that you'd really love.
I would completely hate. You're correct.
RoboCop 2?
RoboCop 2, no, I didn't really like him in that. Anomalisa, I guess, but it's animated. I don't have to worry about it there so much. Probably a lot of the stuff that he's done, I like him in some bit parts like The Man with One Red Shoe. Like that's a weird thing, but it's such a small part. Same thing with Heat. Like he was fine in Heat, but again, it's a small part. And so I feel like for me that ends up being where I can handle him better. Yeah, I think largely struggle with him as a performer.
I had first seen him in the movie he did right before this. Actually, I don't even know if I saw this movie first, but it was FX. Do you remember that film?
Yeah, I don't know if I could tell you who he was in it, but I loved the movie at the time.
I loved the movie too, and I feel like that was one of my earliest connections besides Manhunter. But obviously, I saw him in Monster Squad. He was Frankenstein's monster, and then he just became a face. And he happened to be. I haven't seen a lot of his films, but I've seen he shows up in a lot of the television that I was watching at the time over the years. He's been in a lot of the TV, and it's always been fun to see his face show up because I know that face. That's Francis Dollarhyde, and I think he's great. I wonder. Yeah, it sounds like from your perspective, if we didn't have Lecter and it was just more time spent with Dollarhyde, that would have done a disservice to the film, in your estimation.
It's possible. It also, I guess, it would depend on what they gave me of him. Like, would there be something more with him that I could have attached to more? It's hard to say. There are moments that I am fine with in the film. I think sometimes it's just like, I don't know, as the story develops, as we kind of follow him, we first start seeing him when he's going to work and he has to talk to the woman who works in the dark room who happens to be blind, and that's Joan Allen, and there's that interesting connection that they have that I do find interesting, and that I think is a compelling part of that story to me, where she ends up kind of attracted to this person because of how he talks so directly and is kind of quiet. And there's this strange drive. And also just the fact that, he takes her to this vet that he knows to pet this tranquilized tiger, which is such a strange scene, but it is an interesting in the scope of the character of a person who is like looking for power, to like godlike power in some capacity. There is this sense of putting this blind woman who is blind like that already has a harder time, and as somebody who is thinking of himself as God, putting this in quotes as far as his perspective, but weaker figure in a situation with this massive killer beast, but in a powerful situation that he's kind of ended up manipulating, where she is now able to hold the tiger and everything. And I find that to be a fascinating sequence. Like, those are the moments that I find really compelling that we have within the film.
I'm really glad you brought up that scene. I think I see it differently than you do. I actually look at that as possibly a great example, a textbook example of love bombing. Like, this guy is so immediately fascinated by this woman and doesn't have to fear his own looks in front of her because she's blind, that he falls for her so deeply, so fast. I think his bringing her to the tiger is a genuine expression of love. I think it's an expression of intimacy, that he knows this is a thing that she's going to deeply appreciate, and is trying to use that to build connection, not to express, the otherwise sort of perverse sense of power that he has in the rest of the movie. I think this is the one that stands out, and the one that becomes so heartbreaking because he so deeply misinterprets the later signals of the guy who gives her a ride home. I found the sequence with the tiger, as she's touching the tiger, deeply moving. I was surprised at how sort of connected I was to that sequence, that he was giving of himself to call in this favor, and that she was able to experience this thing that otherwise she had never experienced before. And Joan Allen plays it very, very well.
I think that is all there too. Like, I do think that he genuinely has this attraction to her and this draw to this woman because she likes him for who he is, again, largely because she's blind and can't see him. But still, there is this attraction that he suddenly feels for her. I just think that there's also more to it. I mean, you don't just take somebody to go pet a drugged tiger, like that was a big decision to say, you know what, I happen to have a vet friend.
But it's not like he's like, I'm going to go put you at risk. It's totally monitored.
No.
Like, the actual doctor is there.
Oh, I know, but it's just like, that's like the sort of thing that, like, to come to mind, like the first time, like the instant he meets her, right, to go, I've got a vet who can get this tiger drugged. Let's do it. Like, it's just such a strange, like, thing to immediately come to the forefront of your mind.
It's less exciting to have her pet a drugged house cat. I think this is the thing that makes it different. Yeah. And he didn't put her in the cage with it. Like, here. Oh, yeah. I know you can't see what's coming, but you're in the cage with a sleeping Bengal tiger, right? It's not. Okay.
Yeah.
We may be in a position where your cynicism has actually peaked in this relationship between the two, and all I see is balloon hearts.
Yes, that's possible. It's possible. Going back though to the conversation about Dollarhyde and this idea of wanting to kind of put himself into a position of God and control and everything. It's interesting watching this film, and we get a few moments of production design focused on Dollarhyde and his place, where he's got this giant wall, like lit up wall vinyl piece that's hanging of like a Mars landscape. And then in another room in his house, it's like the cosmos, like all these heavenly things. And then the moon and everything. And I immediately went to, and this is jumping way back in our show toward the first season when we talked about Clute, because the villain in that film, Cable, also has this God complex and has this room that he's in where he's sitting at this table in his office, and the back is a lit up mural of like a interplanetary object. I can't remember if it's the moon or what it is, but it's a very similar thing. And it's such an interesting concept to have these characters drawn to some sort of a power obsession, this godlike desire to look at it where they view themselves as so far above everything else that they are literally in space looking down upon them. And I found that to be such an interesting element of the production design that Michael Mann kind of incorporated into the sequences with Dollarhyde. What did you think about all of those?
Yeah, I liked it quite a bit. I think using, in particular, the William Blake painting of the Red Dragon as this sort of avatar of his undescribed becoming, Dollarhyde's undescribed transformation. He just knows he's going to be something greater, but we don't know what it is. The fact that this painting so adeptly describes his relationship with Joan Allen's character too. I can't remember what the actual title of it is. The Red Dragon and the Lady Clothed in Sun or something.
The Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed with the Sun by William Blake. Yeah.
I mean, their relationship ends up becoming sort of what is perceived in the painting, I think is quite lovely, almost diminished in the film. And I think that's an area where that could be, their relationship happens so late in the film that I think it's underplayed just how important that their relationship is together and to his becoming something else. The pacing ends up being such that it's the film moves so fast in that third act that I don't think we get as much of her attraction to him as we need. And I think that's another thing in the book that we get more of, that she is authentically attracted to him and he is so inside his own head about it that he can't perceive that relationship as authentically. And that's great conflict. And we don't, it doesn't maintain.
Well, it's literally like they are around each other for like maybe 2 days, maybe 3. Like, he goes into the dark room to talk to her about whatever the issue was. That's the connection. He's drawn to her. He agrees to give her a ride home. On the way, he takes her to the tiger. She is mesmerized. They go back to his place and he does his homework watching the home movies of the person he's going to kill next. And she hops on his lap and they make love. She wakes up the next morning. They talk on the dock, and then I think she goes back to work. And that night, he goes to pick her up, and that's when he sees the guy, the other person, dropping her off, and in his head thinks that it could have been a few days later, but whatever the situation was, it's a very, very short relationship.
Yeah,
and so it's interesting, and I guess I'm curious. Like, in the book, is it that short also? And is it, from her perspective, just like a one-night fling with a coworker sort of thing, or is there actually this draw that she has to him? I'm curious about that because it felt like there was a little bit of a draw into his personality and everything, but I didn't get a sense that from her that she had like fallen in love or anything.
Yeah, and my sort of sense memory of the book is that we get more of that, like that she becomes much more of an important relationship in his life, which makes the ultimate betrayal that much more visceral, right? At the end of the movie, when he turns and believes she has betrayed him, it becomes something of greater weight than is present in the movie.
Yeah. Right. And I will say, I loved how Mann shot that sequence with the moment where the coworker walks her up to the door and it's like he sees like a little eyelash or something stuck on her cheek and is just taking it off, basically, is what's happening.
Totally innocent exchange.
Totally innocent. But from Dollarhyde's perspective, like when we cut back to it, there's a light set up behind the two people in front of the door that's making them glow. It's shot a little slow, so everything looks incredibly romantic, and it played so well. Like, we get into his head there. It was perfect. I loved the way that they constructed that to really put Dollarhyde in this mental place where his entire world really just collapsed, which led to that moment where he kills the coworker right there in the yard.
Yeah. In the hedge. The moment that we cut to the backlit shot, in my head, just the chorus of if you like pina coladas, right, just starts playing. That's the whole sound design happened at once. And I don't think that's what was actually playing, but in my head, that's how I remember it.
Pretty sure it wasn't that.
It becomes like an Adam Sandler movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's funny.
Another aside, one of the things that they use in this sequence to follow when he takes her is on in Agata Davida, which is
the long version.
The really long version.
It's like a 17 or 18 minute long version of that song,
it's
right?
Crazy Iron Butterfly Enthusiasm version. And but it plays really, really well because it adds to this sort of hypnosis of that sequence, which I think is ultimately played nicely. One of the things that I read about this getting ready for the show is that Tom Noonan went completely method in his preparation for Dollarhyde, and he ended up staying in his trailer, staying at different hotels, taking different transportation, making people refer to him as Francis. And so the first time he and Will Graham, I'll say, meet is when Petersen throws himself through the plate glass window. That's the first time that they were ever in the room together in shooting this film. I think it's great. I think if I have any criticism of the final sequence of the film is that it's too short. It plays very, very quickly. All I can think about is compare it to the night vision goggle sequence in the movie we're going to talk about next week, which in almost every way improves on the fear, the hunt, the intrigue of what this final set piece is.
Yeah, it's an interesting final set piece. Again, I mean, the lighting and everything, Dante Spinotti's lighting is just so fascinating throughout. Like, we've got such fantastic, like, full blues and greens and whites, like some real interesting color schemes. And here it's definitely, we're kind of getting some kind of that blue and orange. It's really beautiful. But the sequence always starts for me that we've got Dollarhyde with Reba trapped inside. She is, we kind of talked about this in our pre-show chat. We were talking about films with blind characters, and the idea of a blind character being trapped in a room with somebody who's after them is kind of a terrifying one. And she's kind of trapped in this room, this space that she doesn't know, with the Dollarhyde coming after her, ready to kind of basically slash her throat. And then you have William Petersen as Will decide he's going to jump through the window instead of, I don't know, maybe just shooting through the window or something. Like, it seems like such a dumb idea, and it looks cool, but I always question that as like, that's how you're going to do it? Like, you're jumping through a window, you're going to cut yourself up, you're potentially going to lose any sense of surprise and momentum that you have, and it just, and then he immediately gets knocked out. And so, yeah, it's a little... It's a strange way to start the sequence off. I do end up liking how it ends up playing, but it always starts in a way I'm like,
I couldn't agree more. I think what they're, and don't forget, Dollarhyde sees him running across the yard.
Yeah, right.
To jump through. And I think it's made worse because it's slowed down. And so we actually watch him in this sort of paralyzingly slow motion jump through the window, which again, criticism of the Michael Mann style over substance. It looks great. It should not be thought about with any degree of depth, because I totally agree with you. The thing that's nice about it is we do get the changing sort of roles of Dollarhyde and Graham, that Graham is now the one in the yard peeking through the giant windows. And that is a sort of metaphorical switch that is not played to tremendous effect, but it's at least present.
Yes. No, I got distracted because I was like, I got really curious. I'm like, how does the resolution end in the book? And so I was looking at the Wikipedia page. So apologies.
Okay, so how does it end in the book?
So we're at Dollarhyde's place. He kidnaps Reba, takes her to his house, and he's going to kill her. He says, I'm going to kill you and then kill myself. And with a gun. He's actually going to shoot her. She hears the gunfire and a body hits the floor. He's also going to blow the house up. She gets out of the house. Graham gets there, comforts her, nobody can find Dollarhyde, but they think he died in the fire. Graham goes back to his house in Florida, and Dollarhyde shows up at his house. There's a violent struggle. He stabs Graham in the face, and then Will's wife actually is the one who shoots Dollarhyde.
The books parallel would be Michael Caine and Jaws, that they follow each other around the world.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, but we know that he had Will's address.
Yeah, that's true.
And if they're assuming that Dollarhyde is dead, I suppose you can see him moving his family out of the little safe place that the FBI had set them up in and back home. And so, yeah. And so then, but I imagine it's this sort of situation where I wonder if in the book, like when Dollarhyde shows up at the house, does he jump through the windows perhaps instead? Like, is there a little flip? But yeah, I don't know. I guess I kind of like that better, that, it would have made the movie longer, but I'm not a fan of the way that Will just runs in there like that,
Yeah. Well, I think they could have tightened up the relationship stuff between Will and his wife. I found like they should have executed that faster. I think they were trying to build the relationship of Will at home, and we didn't need as much of them lounging in bed and moving around. Just get to the case. If you're going to keep all the other stuff, then let's make the central point of the film, which is solving this crime and that getting us to that final confrontation, paramount. Beef that up. Cut the relationship stuff. We know relationships are hard. She was not a useful a character written as is, and I didn't need as much of Mrs. Graham.
You could say she's pretty typically written as a woman in a Michael Mann film.
Michael Mann film, yeah, 100%. Yeah. And that would have given us more opportunity to allow him to beef up Joan Allen's part. Like Reba, I would have loved to see more Reba, less Mrs. Graham. Well,
yeah, and it's interesting because I while I agree, I also think that. And maybe this is where my mind is, because I think it could have been fine with the material they had with Will's wife, Molly, had they actually had a little more of that final resolution with her, because, they're in this situation where he had been so traumatized from his final capture of Lecter that it literally put him into a place where he had to retire from working as an agent, right? Like he had to step back because he had gotten too close and it was too dark a space for him to be in. And she doesn't want him to go back into it. And he said he wouldn't. And that conversation about like, you're not even asking me, you're just, he's asking, but he's not really asking. He's kind of already decided he's going to go back and do it. And then we end up in that situation where goes through all of the stuff with Dollarhyde, and then the end resolution just feels very pat. Like she looks at his cut up and bruised face, and they go stand by the ocean and everything. But we don't have that final connective resolution of the realities of everything that he's just gone through, and kind of the familial resolution, I guess. And I don't know if they just kind of blithely write that off as, well, he had that great conversation with his son in the grocery store, and so now everything's going to be okay when he finally comes home. I don't know. Again, to your point, like they probably could have thinned all that out, but maybe there was a way to give us just a little bit more of a resolution there.
Or you said it, longer film. Like this is a movie I'd be okay taking it to 2.5 hours. Like this is what I've come to expect from Michael Mann films. And actually, you brought something up that I realized I've never seen the director's cut. What do you get? What did the director think was important to put back?
It's a very short director's cut. And I
can already tell it doesn't solve my concerns.
Yeah, it's only 3 extra minutes, although it's one of those director's cuts where it's 3 extra minutes, but there's also scenes that are completely revised and everything, I don't know if there's a lot of extra stuff that gives you anything really that new or exciting. I think that I'm trying to remember. I'm looking again because I didn't watch that version this time. And I think that there are elements where there's a longer scene with the head of the police who, as they are getting ready to go out and look. Yeah, I'm not seeing really much that says there is a big expansive change to it or anything.
Okay. Well, that's disappointing.
Well, and it's interesting because it's actually sourced from a work print and it was never actually approved by Michael Mann as an official version of the film. So it's not really a director's cut. It's just like an earlier cut before they kind of cleaned it up.
Okay. Well, disappointing.
Yeah. I'm curious now because this is really the only film in this entire series where we're going to get an opportunity to see another version of it, as we get to Red Dragon. So I'm curious, like some of our issues, because I've only seen Red Dragon once when it came out in theaters. And I'm just curious now as we move through this series, when we get to that, how much of these problems get answered or don't,
It does make me want to watch Red Dragon next, and true to the release chronology of the books. Red Dragon was the first of the books and the second of the Anthony Hopkins Lecter movies.
Third.
So it makes me a little bit want to third of the Lecter. Yes, thank you. And it makes me want to go back and look at those out of context. I wonder actually how they play. I've never watched them in book order. I think they're pretty standalone.
It definitely felt like, well, we'll talk about when we get to Red Dragon. It felt like because Hannibal had just come out, it felt like, man, Anthony Hopkins is getting old, but if we want to do a prequel to these other two movies, we better do it right away before he gets any older so that we can somewhat try to make him look a little younger.
Interesting.
That's kind of where it went.
Okay.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how it plays for sure.
A thing that I didn't get just on the technical note, I did see that apparently in that final sequence, they filmed it at 4 different frame rates, from 24 to 60. And I don't think it's possible for me to see it as intended. My frame rate didn't change in my digital release.
Well, when he jumps through the window, that's when it goes to 24 frames a second because it goes real slow right there, right? It slows down as he's jumping through the window.
It slows down, but it just looks like slow motion. It doesn't look like a frame rate change. Like when it goes to 36, 48, like it doesn't appear to be a frame rate change. And I wonder if that's because I'm watching it on the Apple TV, which has a frame rate setting that says stick to the source frame rate no matter, or stick to a fixed frame rate instead of mirror the source, or the digital version doesn't actually change frame rate somehow because it never goes, it doesn't look anything else like a standard slow-mo, that sequence.
Did you watch through it again to check that? Because I would think that maybe it's just your mind telling you that.
My mind is fine, Andy. How dare you?
Because when a film is released, I mean, they're going to release it as a film that's like 24 frames a second.
Yeah.
Regardless of what they did in the edit at the time to actually, because they've manipulated all that in the edit. It's not like Apple is getting a digital version that says it's all 24, but this section goes to 60 and then it's at 36. Like that's not how it works.
But that's the thing. Apple can now.
But they're not going to know. Like when the film is submitted by the studio, by the distributor, it just says 24 frames. Like they just check the 24 frame box.
Or 48 or 60, whatever that single frame rate is.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. They're not going to say 24, except this section.
Which is what I want it to do. That's what I want it to do, is actually give me more frames. I want it to go to telenovela right in the middle and then switch back to 24.
That would be interesting.
Last little notes. I love the soundtrack of this movie. They used 2, not 1, but 2 Shriekback songs. And I was a big Shriekback fan in the day. And so it was delightful to see this movie includes Shriekback. 3 Shriekback songs, I'm sorry.
I don't think I knew any of these songs back in the day. Like there was not a single a single song from here that I recognized. I think the only song that now that I would say that I recognize is Inagata Devita. The other ones I think are all of the time, and in the scope of what I expect from Michael Mann, this is exactly kind of fitting into what you'd get from Miami Vice or that sort of thing, where he's tapping into the musical zeitgeist of the time, putting these songs in that kind of create mood and everything. I think the Inagata Devita is an interesting one because apparently he had been in correspondence with a serial killer at the time, and the serial killer said that Inagata Devita was their song with him and the girl that he killed. And so it was like a love song to this guy. And so he thought that was so fascinating that he wanted that song in there. I like that song. I like listening to it. It plays well. It's a great song. But I don't think this is a soundtrack that I would probably put on. I think a lot of these songs aren't the sort of 80s classics that, that I jump in and listen to regularly.
Yeah, that's disappointing. I'm sorry for you.
Yeah. And I don't think I've even heard of Shriekback before. So, sorry.
Oh. They've been used in a bunch of obscure soundtracks. I might have to build you a playlist of great Shriekback songs used in movies. I'm going to do that for you. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
That'll be my assignment.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I mentioned a little bit of the lighting in Dante Spinotti and everything. Any thoughts from you as far as the way that Michael Mann is really splashing color around here?
Oh my God, it's so mannish, right? Like it's just, apart from that first, any sequence on the beach, which is like natural color, we're either white, blue, green, or a dose of orange, but not very much. It's mostly white, blues, and greens. And those blues and greens are deep and moody. And I mean, I love it. And I absolutely applaud Spinotti shooting across such an incredible colorscape. But I do see those who see this as style over substance.
I enjoy all of the look, and this is something that I suppose in the scope of Mann films, I enjoy this style quite a bit in this film, and so I'm totally okay with it. If I find that there are issues that I deal with more, it's things like Will Graham's constant narration and his voice recording into his tape recorder and stuff. Like so much of that, it really wears me down. And I imagine that it works better in the book because you can just play it in his head. But here we get him just talking to himself so much as he's like investigating and looking at materials and like having these dialogues with Dollarhyde in his head. And it's just, that wears on me a bit with this one.
You know, it's funny. I would imagine that it would wear on me too, and it doesn't. For some reason, the fact that he's holding that tape recorder and talking, I actually find that a fascinating and thoughtful kind of approach to his procedural bent. That's just who he is, and I like watching him process out loud.
But he doesn't always have the tape recorder. Like there are times where he's sitting in like the little evidence room and he's just talking.
Yeah, I know. And it's awesome. I like the way he talks to himself, right? Because I don't, what's the alternative? The alternative is it's just voiceover. It's just his voice in his head. And that would have been terrible, Andy. It would have been terrible.
No, I know. Well, I'm curious how it plays in when we get to, again, the remake. I'm curious what they do with that one because I can't remember. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm guessing we're just going to end up with a lot of the same stuff.
The thing I'm actually most interested in is getting to next week, looking at Jodie Foster, because I think Jodie Foster is at such a different part of her career in relationship to the Lecter character, to Buffalo Bill. I think it's a really fascinating place approaching a character who is fresh out of FBI school versus Will Graham, who is a seasoned, experienced investigator, and I think that's going to be this big switch for me.
Well, speaking about her, I mean, we haven't really talked about Petersen. I mean, what do you think of William Petersen? Because I don't think I had probably seen him in much, even after, like, because I didn't watch this probably until about the time Hannibal came out. And I feel like the only reason that I knew of who he was because of CSI.
I think that's a good reason to know who he was, right?
Well, like, certainly. That's kept him busy.
For sure. His contribution to the category is legion. Like he's fantastic for so many years. He's become kind of the elder statesman of the CSI television universe. That's how I knew him first. I had seen him in that and then come back to this film, I think. And I'm always surprised and pleased when I see William Petersen. I think he's one of those like underappreciated character guys. I think he's really, really good in this movie. And I don't know what it is. It feels like he might be in the uncanny valley of approachable dudes. Like he looks too approachable. Like he would be too easily on my friends list. You know what I mean? Like there's no way I can believe him because he's too normal of a guy. And yet in this movie, I never question Will Graham. I never question him.
No, I really like him. He seems like somebody I can buy him being a broken figure trying to sort himself out. I think that he plays that well.
There's that. I mean, so much of of the camera's approach to him is in straight up headshot right in front of his face, right? We either get torso shots. There's a great shot where he's standing in one of the victim's home's bedrooms and the light is off and it's all blue, turns on and it's white and the blood is all over the walls and everything is just destroyed. But our first shot of him is just torso up, and later we get him standing next to a light post or something, kind of mimicking staring in a window, very close headshot, extreme close up on him. And he always looks a little bit dizzy, like he's so deeply in the head of the killer that he looks like he's just might fall over any second. I think that intensity is really good and not, clumsy as you might expect from my description of it. Like I'm worried about him suffering some sort of a seizure event.
All right. A couple notes as we're going to be kind of continuing this series. It will be interesting. We've got Dennis Farina here playing FBI agent Jack Crawford, who returns as a different role in the FBI in the next film and a different actor playing him in the next film. Jack Crawford is a continuing character. Lecter, I think, is a continuing character. And then interestingly, we have Lieutenant Fisk, I believe was his name. And that was Barney. He'll end up being the actor who plays Barney in the later films. It's Frankie Faison. He's actually the only actor to have been in this and then the next three Lecter films. Obviously, he wasn't in the prequel, but I'm just curious because he's Lieutenant Fisk. He works at the St. Louis police office where they're pulling up all the pictures of all the people as they're on the phone trying to pull everybody up. He's the guy there. So part of me wants to mentally rewrite this universe and have Lieutenant Fisk actually, his first name is Barney. And after this moment, he shifts over to work for the FBI and ends up working just as kind of like the caretaker for the prisoners, which is where he ends up.
I think that's it. I think that's what happened from here on. That's exactly what happened.
Oh, so funny. It's an interesting movie. I do enjoy this one quite a bit in the scope of Mann films. It's a little rougher around the edges, but there's just a lot to like. And I enjoy the story. I think it's a great story. And I'm, really looking forward to continuing the series and really looking forward to revisiting the remake of this because I'm curious how that one plays.
Yeah, more than any of them, I'm interested in that one. I think this is a fantastic movie that just really explores that sort of thin line between good and evil, and I think all of the films sort of live in that territory. So this will be fun.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, we'll be right back. But first, our credits.
The Next Reel is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. Music by Jakob Pietrus, Dogbeat, Seth Parson, Oriel Novella, and Eli Catlin. Andy usually finds all the stats for the awards and numbers at the-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show. The city never sleeps. But you need something to wear while you stay up watching Heat for the 15th time. You walk into the joint, the Next Reel merch store, Dark corners, bright ideas. Shirts, hoodies, mugs, all built to hold the kind of coffee that keeps you analyzing shot composition till dawn. You want haute tours? We got Kurosawa, Carpenter, Kubrick, Leone, in English and Italian because we're classy like that. You want to walk down the street like you just stepped out of a Mann film? We got designs so sharp they cut through the LA haze. But maybe you're more of a Fast Times at Richmond High kind of operator. Spicoli Surf School has a shirt with your name on it, metaphorically speaking. Or maybe you're the kind of soul who'd rather rep Look Who's Talking, Ubriacho Flight School, best in the business. We got deep cuts too, Messiah of Evil, Johnny Dangerously. Hell, we even got a National Lampoon's European Vacation design, Rusty's Tour. You know the one, bestseller, immortalized in cotton. And the best part, no shady backroom deals, no two-bid hustlers, just clean quality merch, straight from thenextreel.com/merch. No middleman, no heat, just you, your love of cinema, and the kind of threads that make people stop and say, damn, that's movies. All right, how to do it awards season. Did Michael Mann get any cheers?
This was not a film that was very well received. It struggled at the box office and it struggled at the awards season. It only had one win with one other nomination. At the Cognac Festival du Film Policier, it actually won the Critics Award there. And at the Edgar Allan Poe Awards, it was nominated for Best Motion Picture, but lost to Something Wild.
There is a Cognac Festival of Police Films.
Yeah, right?
That seems like a thing that's right up our alley. How did we not know about this? It's just police films?
Can we go to that? Is it still happening? Let's see. So the inaugural festival is 82. It was held each year other than 91. The festival focused on the police and crime genre, and after 93 featured a short film and television film competition. And then in 2007, the wine syndicate Bureau National Interprofessionnel du Cognac announced it was withdrawing its support of the 25-year-old film event. Without its main backer, the festival ended. However, another famed wine city, I don't know how you say this, Beaune Côte d'Or, saw value in the format and 2 years later launched a successor, the Festival International du Film Policier de Beaune. Beaune. It was in Cognac and now it's in, I don't know, Beaune. The wine capital of Burgundy in the Côte d'Or department of Eastern France.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That would be a fun festival to go to because you're drinking wine and you're watching
cop movies.
Police and crime movies, yeah.
Outstanding. How to do at the box office.
Well, for Mann's film, he had a budget of 14 or 15 million, or 43.4 million in today's dollars. The movie opened August 15th, 1986, opposite The Fly, Armed and Dangerous, and the limited release of The Boy Who Could Fly. This one landed in 8th place, never really found its ground, and unfortunately quickly disappeared from the box office. In the end, it went on to earn $8.6 million domestically and a measly $1,500 internationally for a total gross of $24.9 million in today's dollars. Not a great start, landing the film with an adjusted loss per finished minute of about $150,000. But at least both Mann and Lecter got to continue moving on.
It's interesting to me that it seems like the reputation of the film has actually grown over the years.
Oh, it definitely has. It was considered quite a kind of a stinker at the time. I don't think the critics were fans of it. And I think that the tone, I think people just didn't know what to make of that, what we now know of as kind of that Mann feel with the films. And yeah, I think the more that Michael Mann has kind of made his films, I think the more that this film has had people reevaluate it.
Yeah, right. Well, I had a ball with it. Is it the best of the series for me? No, but it is still an entry into a universe that I find fascinating.
Yeah. And I mean, I really enjoy this film. I definitely have a lot of problems with it, but it's a very easy film to watch. I enjoy the detective work. I enjoy kind of the darkness of the story. There's just a lot that works here for me. So yeah, it's easily one I will continue checking out time and time again.
The typeface doesn't work for me. I don't know what it is, but it's like Comic Sans adjacent. I don't care for it.
It feels like an 80s, like a 80s font that's not as fitting for the film as it should be. That's for sure.
It screams Manhunter. which is not what the movies should be saying.
Probably not. Probably not.
All right.
All right, we'll be right back for our ratings, but first, here's the trailer for next week's movie, Jonathan Demme's The Silence of the Lambs.
You spook easily, Starling?
Not yet, sir.
He's past the others. The last cell. I'll be watching. You'll do fine.
A killer is on the loose.
Keeps them alive for 3 days. Then he shoots them, skins them, and dumps them.
A rookie FBI agent is on his trail.
He's got real physical strength, cautious, precise, and he's never impulsive. He'll never stop.
But in order to track him down, she'll have to match wits.
I'll help you catch him, Clary.
Believe me, you don't want Hannibal Lecter inside your head.
With the darkest of all minds.
Just do your job, but never forget what he is.
Oh, he's a monster. Pure psychopath. So rare to capture one alive. So close to the way you're going to catch him. Do you realize that? Oh, Clarice, your problem is you need to get more fun out of life.
You told me you don't spook easily.
You call this easy, sir?
Lecter's missing an arm.
Man's a raving maniac. Who knows what he'll do?
Thank you, Clary. Thank you.
The Florida night is alive with the sound of the suburbs, the distant bark of a dog mingling with the gentle rustle of palm fronds in a warm breeze. I find myself hidden in the shadows of a well-manicured lawn, my eyes fixed on the brightly lit windows of the house before me. For days I've been tracking a suspicious figure, a lone wolf who seems to be casing the neighborhood, paying just a little too much attention to the comings and goings of the families who call this place home. My instincts, honed by years on the force, tell me that something is about to go down, something sinister and irreversible. As I watch, the figure emerges from the darkness, moving with a sense of purpose toward the house. My heart races, my hand hovering over my radio, ready to call for backup at the first sign of trouble. But as the figure approaches the front door, I notice something odd. They're not trying to break in, but ringing the doorbell, a broad smile on their face. The door opens and I catch a glimpse of the family inside, their expressions not of fear, but of warm welcome. The figure steps inside, and through the window I can see them huddled together, their faces illuminated by the glow of a computer screen. And then it clicks, like a key turning in a lock. They're not planning a crime, but sharing something wonderful. The joys of the Next Reel Family of Film Podcast's exclusive membership program. I can see it now, the figure animatedly pointing to the screen, extolling the virtues of early access to ad-free episodes, monthly bonus content, and a vibrant community of fellow film lovers. The family's eyes light up, their smiles growing wider by the moment. And as they navigate to truestory.fm/join, I feel a sense of relief wash over me, a weight lifting from my shoulders. This wasn't a killer on the prowl, but a passionate cinephile eager to spread the word about the wonders of the next reel. I watch as the family signs up, their excitement palpable even from my vantage point across the street. $5 a month or $55 a year? A small price to pay for the promise of endless cinematic delights and a sense of belonging to something greater than oneself. As I slip away into the night, leaving the happy scene behind me, I can't help but feel a sense of kinship with the figure, a shared love for the magic of the movies. And as I make my way back to the car, I find myself planning to take the plunge myself as soon as I get back to the office, joining the ranks of the Next Reel's devoted members. Dispatch, this is Detective Nelson. Stand down. False alarm. Just a friendly neighborhood film buff spreading the good word. Over and out.
Letterboxd, Andy. Letterboxd.com/thenextreel. That's where we keep all of our reviews and hearts. That's where we store them for later use. What are you going to do with this movie?
I do enjoy this movie quite a bit. It's a good Michael Mann film, one that I love and will return to. I feel like it's definitely not up there with the 5-star films that I love from him. But, and again, I have my issues, but I still say it's a 4-star and a heart film for me.
4-star and a heart. Okay. I struggle with this one because I don't actually know how I'm going to review the next batch of movies. So I may have to revisit because I think it could be a 4-star and a heart movie, but that implies that some movie coming up is going to be less than because I don't like this as much. And what would that be? Could this be a 3-star movie? Because I need a little bit more headroom. You know what I'm saying?
Your issue with your stars and the way that it sits next to other films with stars is a wholly unique one. Wholly unique.
Because what do we have? What do we have here? We've got 5 movies we're talking about. Is that right?
Yeah, we've got this film, we've got The Silence of the Lambs, we've got Hannibal, we've got Red Dragon, and then we have Hannibal Rising.
So what if I were to tell you that you only get 15 total stars for this series? What if I were to tell you that?
I would say, suck it. I don't play your silly star games, mister.
Outstanding. I'm going to start with 4, and I'm going to track my stars.
Okay.
I'm going to see if
I can't wait to see how you split up 15 stars among 5 films.
I might have to shake some things up later. That's all.
Yeah, because basically you're allowing yourself 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is what you're giving yourself.
Yeah. But if I have 2 2-star movies, then I get an extra star later. And did I just give it to Manhunter?
Unless you have 2 2-star movies and no 1-star movie, then by default, you don't have an extra star.
Uh-huh. Yeah, this is going to be trouble. I might have to cheat.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with 4 stars. We might have to revisit this.
Yeah.
5, 4, 3, 2,
I'm looking forward to that. All right. Well, that averages our rating to 4 stars and a heart over on Letterboxd, where our account is at the next reel. You can find me there at Soda Creek Film, and you can find Pete there at Pete Wright. So what did you think about Manhunter? We would love to hear your thoughts. Hop into the Show Talk channel over in our Discord community, where we will be talking about the movie this week.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
I'm going to count all the movies that we've done on the show that I've reviewed, and I'm going to just start at 3-star average. And I'm going to go back and see. I'm going to readjust so that I have a fixed number of stars. That no matter what, I'm only adding 3 stars to each additional movie that we add. So something has to give. That's my level of insanity. What's yours?
I don't think anything can top that level of insanity.
What's funny is I had already rated this review 4 stars when I first saw it years ago, or when I first rated it, and so I feel kind of stuck. I feel a little bit stuck.
You're in a pickle, a real pickle.
I'm in a pickle. Letterboxd giveth, Andrew.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
Okay, I want 5 stars and heart. I'm going first because yours is really funny, and mine is from Comrade Yui, who says, of course Mann was the first to realize that the ideological structure of both the cop narrative and the serial killer narrative were identical and cyclically reinforced each other decades before the whole true crime genre was established. The institution of the police needs the serial killer as a specular fantasy. It projects the psychopathy as an manufactured industry, and the serial killer as this fantasy requires the threat of law enforcement and the prison industrial complex to justify their killings, to validate their identity as an iconoclastic deviant. Manhunter is more than a simple exploration of duality. It's a broken mirror reflecting back the viewer's own social perception. Take that, Andy.
Ooh, wow.
Take that.
Listen to that.
Mic drop.
It's a good 5-star review. Good job,
I know.
Comrade Yui.
Outstanding. All right, what do you got?
Well, I went with the one that has the most likes over on Letterboxd. Hopkins and Mickelson both play Lecter with a poise and polish, but Brian Cox seems like he actually eats people. 4.5 stars by Mike Ginn. Oh my goodness.
You can kind of imagine they're writing Succession and they think, you know, it'd be great if we had a character that we actually thought ate people to play this part. We have that. It's Brian Cox.
That's right.
No notes.
And done.
So good. Thanks, Letterboxd.